The car wash was a cavern of shadows, its usual hum replaced by a suffocating silence. The faint stench of mildew clung to the air, mixing with the sharp tang of cleaning chemicals. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced like phantom limbs. Alone, I scrubbed at a stubborn stain on the hood of an old sedan, my gloved hand moving in rhythmic circles. That's when I heard it, a clang, loud and metallic, reverberating from the drying bay like a thunderclap. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, the soapy sponge slipping from my fingers. Turning toward the sound, I strained my eyes against the dim light. A shadow moved, glided, along the far wall, too fast to be human but too deliberate to be a trick of the light. Then I saw it, outside the soap-smeared windows. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, its glowing eyes like twin embers burning through the darkness. It didn't move. It didn't blink. It just watched. Working the night shift at the car wash had always felt isolating, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. The pay was decent, and I enjoyed the solitude. But the others, those who worked the day shift, had always warned me about the nights. Weird stuff happens after dark, one of them said, nervously laughing as if it were a joke. Don't stay alone too long. I dismissed their stories as nonsense, urban legends designed to spook the new guy. Still, something about the car wash's layout always felt wrong. The narrow bays stretched endlessly under harsh fluorescent lights, the air always a little too cold, the sounds of the machinery too loud and yet somehow too distant. That night was different from the start. The moment I stepped into the building, I felt it, a prickling at the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were already watching me. The usual hum of the conveyor belts seemed muted, and the smell, something sour and earthy, hung in the air. I chalked it up to a dirty drain and got to work, trying to ignore the growing unease twisting in my gut. It began subtly, things I could almost explain away. The flickering lights, the occasional faint thud from the other end of the building, the way my tools seemed to shift slightly from where I'd left them. But then, as I was cleaning the soap tanks, the motion sensors in the empty washing bay tripped. I glanced at the monitor. Nothing. Just the empty bay, bathed in pale light. But something felt off. The brushes weren't spinning, and the conveyor belt wasn't moving. Then, as I stared, the brushes jerked to life. Slowly at first, then spinning faster than I'd ever seen them. A shadow passed through the bay, too quick to register clearly, but large enough to block out the light for a split second. My breath caught as the camera feed glitched, and for a single heartbeat, the screen showed a face. It wasn't human. Its eyes were empty sockets, its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a glitch, but the uneasy feeling grew. As I walked back toward the staff room, the hallway seemed longer than usual, the shadows darker. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, like there was someone else walking just out of sync with me. Reaching the staff room, I found the door ajar, swinging gently as if someone had just passed through. Inside, the smell of decay hit me like a wall. My phone lay on the floor, the screen cracked. When I picked it up, the flashlight turned on by itself. Illuminating words scrawled across the wall in black, dripping ink, "You can't leave." The door slammed shut. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, like someone speaking just behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was low, guttural, and malicious. I stumbled out of the staff room, my legs shaking. The car wash had transformed. The walls, once sterile metal, now looked like raw, pulsating flesh. Dark veins throbbed beneath the surface, oozing a black, tar-like substance that dripped onto the floor in slow, viscous globs. The conveyor belt sprang to life, its chains rattling like bones. I turned to run, but the belt caught my foot, dragging me backward toward the spinning brushes. They weren't brushes anymore. They were blades, spinning so fast they blurred, their edges gleaming under the dim light. I clawed at the floor, desperate to break free. A voice boomed through the intercom, deep and mocking. "Welcome to the graveyard shift. You can't leave now." The belt stopped suddenly, flinging me onto the wet floor. Gasping, I scrambled to my feet, but the exit door was gone. In its place was a wall of darkness, shifting and writhing like a living thing. The figure appeared again, stepping out of the shadows as if they parted for it. It was tall, impossibly so, its body gaunt and twisted, its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and its mouth split into a grin that stretched far beyond the limits of its face. It spoke, its voice like grinding metal. "You shouldn't have stayed." I backed away, but the floor beneath me gave way, and I fell. Not onto concrete, but into a pool of the black sludge that had been dripping from the walls. It was cold, thick, and suffocating, pulling me under as I thrashed and screamed. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the figure standing at the edge of the pool, its grin widening as it whispered, "This is where you belong now." The suffocating black sludge pulled at me like quicksand, cold and slimy, seeping into my nostrils and ears. I flailed wildly, gasping for air, but every movement seemed to drag me deeper. The figure stood at the edge of the pool, watching with cruel delight, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. Summoning every ounce of strength, I stopped struggling and tried to float, hoping to conserve my energy. My hands brushed against something solid, metal, cold and jagged. It was a maintenance ladder, half submerged in the muck. I gripped it tightly, pulling myself upward with shaky, burning arms. The figure didn't like this. Its grin faded, replaced with an expression of rage. It stretched one of its impossibly long arms toward me, its clawed fingers brushing against my shoulder. The touch burned like acid, and I cried out, kicking with renewed desperation. I broke the surface with a gasp, black sludge pouring from my mouth and nose. My vision blurred, and my lungs felt like they were on fire. The bay around me was unrecognizable, the walls still pulsing and oozing, but the air felt thinner, less oppressive. I was close to escaping. I could feel it. I stumbled to my feet, slipping on the slick floor. Behind me, the figure rose from the sludge, its form shifting and growing, filling the bay with its monstrous presence. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting its shadow across the walls like a massive spider. The exit door was back, barely visible through the flashing lights and thick, oily mist. I ran toward it, ignoring the searing pain in my legs and the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. The door seemed to stretch farther away with every step, but I refused to stop. The machines roared to life behind me, the conveyor belt clanking and spinning at a breakneck speed. The brushes, still bladed, reached out like tentacles, slashing at the air just inches from my back. A deafening screech echoed through the bay, the figure's enraged howl reverberating in my ears. Finally, I reached the door. My trembling hands fumbled with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. I turned around, pressing my back against the cold metal, as the figure loomed closer. Its grin was back, wider and more malevolent than ever, its glowing eyes burning into mine. Then I remembered the emergency release lever, a bright red handle mounted on the wall beside the door. My hand darted toward it, yanking it down with all my strength. A loud clang followed, and the door creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through. I fell onto the asphalt outside, the dawn light blinding me. The cool morning air filled my lungs, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But when I looked back, the car wash wasn't empty. The figure stood in the doorway, its glowing eyes locked on mine. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The building was silent again, its metallic exterior gleaming innocently in the early sunlight. It looked normal, ordinary, even, but I knew the truth. I crawled to my car, hands trembling so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, and I sped out of the parking lot, never looking back. My clothes were soaked with black sludge, the smell of decay lingering in my nose. Even after I reached the safety of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The smell of that place clung to me no matter how many times I showered. My hands bore faint burns where the figure had touched me, the skin red and blistered. I tried telling my boss what had happened, but he dismissed it as exhaustion. When I insisted he check the security footage, he reluctantly pulled it up, The recording showed nothing out of the ordinary. Just me, walking around the bays, occasionally staring off into the distance or talking to myself. "You need a break," he said, sliding the monitor away. "Go home and rest." But rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure. Its glowing eyes and jagged grin burned into my memory. And at night, when the world was quiet, I could still hear it. The hum of the machines, the whisper of the conveyor belts, and the faint, mocking voice. "You can't escape." "Not really."